Imagine a world where empires do not fall because they are weak, but because they are terrified of becoming ordinary. Where men in velvet coats and polished boots decide the fate of continents not on battlefields, but over ledgers, maps, and whispered agreements. This is not a story about collapse by invasion. This is a story about self-destruction in the name of control. At the height of their power, the great empires believed something almost religious. Whoever controls the flow of trade controls the future. Ships, rails, canals, contracts. These were not tools. They were arteries. And like any empire addicted to its own bloodstream, the thought of losing control was unthinkable. So when a new route appeared, when a new technology threatened to make the old monopolies irrelevant, panic set in. Not public panic, no riots, no screams. This was elite panic. Silent, calculated, deadly. Decisions were made that would look rational on paper and catastrophic in history books. Decisions justified as stability. Decisions framed as defense. Decisions that would quietly poison the very system that made these empires rich. You are told that empires fall slowly, that decline is gentle, inevitable, almost natural. That is a lie. The real moment of collapse is sharp and deliberate. It happens when power chooses preservation over adaptation, when fear outweighs imagination, when stopping change feels safer than understanding it. Tonight, we are not asking how empires lost wars. We are asking why they chose to lose the future. Just to stop one ship, one train, one idea from passing through. And once you see the pattern, you may start to recognize it everywhere. Before the fall, there's always a golden age, so bright it blinds those living inside it. The Dutch Republic once sat at the center of the world like a quiet god of commerce. No vast armies, no roaring emperors, just ships, ledgers, banks that whispered promises stronger than cannons. Amsterdam did not conquer with fire. It conquered with credit. Goods flowed in from every horizon, and wealth pooled so deeply that it began to feel permanent. Across the Channel, Britain was watching, learning, improving the formula. Where the Dutch mastered the sea, Britain married trade to industry. Coal fed factories. Factories fed exports. Exports fed ships. And soon, iron rails began cutting across continents like scars that promised progress. The empire did not merely move goods anymore. It compressed time itself. Distance shrank. Markets obeyed schedules. The world started running on British clocks. And in both empires, something subtle happened. Wealth stopped being a means and became an identity. Power was no longer something they used. It was something they assumed. Their systems worked so well for so long that alternatives felt absurd. Why change a machine that prints money? Why question a model that turned merchants into kings? But golden ages have a hidden cost. Comfort breeds fragility. Success erases doubt. And when an empire grows rich without resistance, it forgets how to adapt. The Dutch trusted their ships would always be faster. The British believed their rails would always be indispensable. Each thought they had built not just an advantage, but a law of nature. They didn't realize they were standing on a moving floor. Every empire crosses a line it does not recognize at the time. Not with a declaration, not with a trumpet, but with a decision that feels small, technical, almost boring. This was that moment. A new route began to matter. A shortcut, a technology, a way of moving goods that did not ask permission from the old masters. For the Dutch, rivals learned to build ships nearly as fast, nearly as cheap, without bowing to Amsterdam's banks. For Britain, a single train line, just one, threatened to redirect the flow or redirect flow of trade away from imperial toll gates and financial choke points. This was not merely competition, it was heresy, Inside oak-paneled rooms, the language was careful. No one said fear, they said risk. No one said panic, they said national interest. The question was never how to adapt to the new world. The question was how to stop it, how to delay it, how to make the future wait until the empire was ready. So they bent rules, then rewrote them. They applied pressure where it could not be seen. Loans with strings, treaties with traps, strategic protections that just happened to suffocate alternatives. On paper, everything looked legal, reasonable, necessary. But this was the first betrayal, not of rivals, but of reality itself. By choosing control over evolution, the empires locked themselves into defending a past that was already dissolving. The system became rigid, profitable, yes, but brittle. And brittle systems do not bend. They shatter. From the outside, everything still looked magnificent. Ports were crowded, ledgers were full, palaces glowed at night, as if wealth itself were a renewable resource. This is the most dangerous phase of decline, when the numbers still smile, but the structure underneath has begun to rot. Money kept flowing, but it flowed differently now. Less from innovation, more from extraction, less from building, more from enforcing. The Dutch squeezed their trading networks harder, turning partners into dependents. Britain doubled down on finance, debt, and control of infrastructure, transforming movement itself into a taxable privilege. Trade was no longer about exchange. It was about obedience. The drama intensified quietly. Colonies borrowed to survive. Companies borrowed to compete. Governments borrowed to maintain appearances. Debt stacked upon debt, like dry timber. And because the system still functioned, no one dared to call it what it was. A trap designed to delay decline, not prevent it. Here's the cruel irony. The richer the empire appeared, the more fragile it became. Every ship, every rail line, every contract now carried political weight. Disruption was no longer a nuisance. It was a threat to legitimacy. So force, both visible and invisible, became the default response. And somewhere far from the chandeliers and counting houses, ordinary people paid the price. Prices rose, opportunities narrowed, resistance hardened. The empire mistook this tension for strength. It was pressure building in a sealed chamber. This is where empires stop looking like conquerors and start behaving like accountants with armies. The violence becomes subtle, elegant, almost polite. No banners, no marching columns, just clauses, interest rates, and technical requirements that decide who may move and who must wait. The Dutch perfected it early. Control the ports, ensure the cargo, finance the voyage, and suddenly every merchant sailed under their shadow, even when the flag was not theirs. Britain refined it into something colder. Railways were no longer infrastructure, they were levers. Whoever owned the rails owned time, labor, and markets. A delayed train could ruin a region. A redirected line could starve an economy. This was conquest without occupation, soft power sharpened into a blade. Local elites were invited in, promised stability and profit, then quietly locked into dependency. If they resisted, credit vanished. If they complied, the system rewarded them. Just enough to keep them loyal. Empires did not need to rule people anymore. They ruled incentives. And for a while it worked, spectacularly. Profits surged. Rivals stalled. The illusion of mastery returned. But beneath the surface, something irreversible was happening. By freezing the world in a shape that benefited them, the empires froze themselves too. Innovation moved elsewhere. Flexibility shifted to the margins. They were winning every transaction and losing the century. The break never comes with a warning siren. It comes with a moment that feels manageable until it isn't. crisis erupts. A financial shock, a political rupture, a war framed as unavoidable, defensive, regrettable. The empire tells itself this is temporary. A correction, a necessary show of force to restore balance. But balance does not return. It collapses. For the Dutch, markets turned hostile almost overnight. Credit that once obeyed Amsterdam began fleeing it. Alliances thinned. Rivals coordinated. The sea, their old ally, became crowded and unforgiving. For Britain, the rail and finance machine overreached. Maintaining control demanded interventions that bled resources and legitimacy. The cost of enforcement surpassed the value of control. This is the true climax, when the empire realizes it must spend more power to hold the system together than the system can ever return. Every response accelerates the damage. Raise taxes, and trade slows. Tighten credit, and resistance hardens. Deploy force, and the moral authority evaporates. And then comes the moment they never planned for. The world keeps moving without them. Trade routes reroute. Capital finds new homes. Influence leaks away in silence. The empire is still standing, still armed, still proud, but suddenly irrelevant where it matters most. The collapse is not dramatic. It is humiliating. After the shock, there is no single ending, only a long unraveling. Empires do not disappear. They linger. They explain. They rationalize. They insist that the worst is over, even as the machinery grinds down year after year. What follows is not recovery, but management of decline. Committees are formed. Reforms are announced. Symbols are adjusted, while structures remain untouched. The same minds that designed the trap are tasked with dismantling it, and they cannot admit the design was flawed. So, they treat symptoms and preserve causes. For the Dutch, commerce fragmented into smaller, weaker networks, no longer commanding the world, but servicing it. For Britain, influence thinned across continents, replaced not by collapse but by dependency fatigue. Former partners stopped asking permission. Former subjects stopped believing in inevitability. This phase is quiet, which makes it dangerous. Without a dramatic fall, the myth of control survives. The empire convinces itself it has merely changed roles. But the truth is harsher. Once the flow of trade escapes your grip, no amount of tradition can pull it back. Power drains slowly, then all at once. Not in defeat, but in redundancy. The empire becomes an observer of a system it once dictated, invited to the table, but no longer setting the rules. And this is how dominance ends. Not with ruins, but with irrelevance. The final damage of an empire is never measured in borders. Maps can be redrawn, flags can be lowered with ceremony. What lingers is something far more corrosive, the world it leaves behind. When the Dutch grip loosened, trade did not become fairer. It became more ruthless. Competition intensified. Smaller powers learned the same tricks without the restraint of experience. When Britain's system cracked, its railways, debts, and legal frameworks remained. Scattered across continents like abandoned machinery, humming with tension. The empire faded, but the structures of extraction stayed in place. This is the catastrophe most histories rush past. Empires teach the world how to exploit efficiently. And when they fall, they leave those lessons behind, stripped of any pretense of stewardship. Regions shaped for profit, not resilience, struggle to stand on their own. Economies built to serve, flows they no longer control collapse inward. The irony is brutal. The empires believed they were maintaining order. Instead, they exported instability. The very mechanisms designed to guarantee dominance became blueprints for chaos in the hands of others. And somewhere in the wreckage, a dangerous idea survived. That control is safer than cooperation, that choking a system is better than trusting it to evolve. That idea did not die with the empire. Now step back. Look at the present. Not as a citizen, but as a historian watching patterns repeat with different names and cleaner technology. New routes are emerging again, digital corridors, energy networks, supply chains that promise speed, independence, and escape from old toll gates. And once more, great powers feel the familiar tightening in their chest. Listen carefully to the language being used today. Security, stability, strategic necessity. It is the same vocabulary, polished for a modern audience. The same fear dressed as responsibility. The same belief that if a system can be controlled, it must be, even at the cost of breaking it. Here's the lesson the empires never learned. You cannot freeze the future without freezing yourself. Every attempt to stop movement, to strangle innovation, to punish independence, accelerates the shift you fear. Power that survives is power that adapts, power that insists on obedience, writes its own obituary. So ask yourself, not as a spectator, but as someone living inside the next chapter, if you sat at the center of the world today, would you choose differently? Or would you too sacrifice tomorrow just to keep one train, one route, one idea from passing through? History is not warning us, it is whispering. And whispers are only quiet until it is too late.